Welcome to this week's edition of Focus on Connecticut. I'm Tom Appleby. Lots going on up at the Capitol. Even though the session, in effect, has ended, we still don't know whether there will be an agreement with the unions and the governor. We are taping this program Friday morning, and I'm being very specific about this because it is in such a state of flux. By the end of this day, there may well be an agreement for another vote by the unions, which would then, in some way, undo all of these layoffs that have started. So let's talk about it. We have two freshman lawmakers with us. I want to talk about what's going on up there and the experience of being a lawmaker for the first time. Let me introduce them to you. They are State Representative Jonathan Steinberg, Democrat from the 136th District, which is Westport, and State Representative Brenda Kupchick, who is a Republican from the 132nd District, Fairfield and Southport. So we really zoned in on southwestern Connecticut here. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
So what's your prediction here? By the end of the day, or let's say by Monday, will we have an agreement, and will we be able to undo what the governor has done?
I don't really know. It seems like it's changing all the time. And I read this morning that Governor Malloy is saying that even if they come back, I read this just this morning in the Post, that even if they do come back with a vote, a change, and that they'll agree, he may still move forward with layoffs and cut out the health care give-backs and some of the pension give-backs. So I'm not really sure what we're going to end up seeing happening.
There's a reason for that as well. The new fiscal year starts July 1st. We're already past that. Mm-hmm. So some of the projected savings that were in that original concession package are now a little bit out of date. He needs to save more money to balance the budget than he needed a couple of weeks ago. So the longer it takes for a concession deal to be reached, the more savings that he's going to need. Plus, the administration may become enamored of some of the additional savings that they've generated and decide those are just good decisions on behalf of the state of Connecticut regardless. So there is pressure on the unions to come to some sort of closure on this sooner than later.
There's an added problem, too, in that raises went into effect on July 1st. No one knows how to get those back from the unions if indeed they say, okay, let's undo what we've done. They're not going to give back that money, so they're going to have to figure out a way to get it going forward.
Well, we have retroactive taxes, so maybe they can retroactively.
And we will talk about those retroactive taxes in a little bit because they are going to hit all of us in August. But what you mentioned in reading in the Post, that he may just like what he's done and stay with it. Deputy Senate Republican leader Len Fasano has spoken out about what's been going on and says the entire imbroglio was an orchestrated, cynical gambit with a predetermined outcome in smoke and mirrors concession deal. He says the whole process, cuts in safety, transportation, education, all of it, is just orchestrated to scare the public. Do you see it that way? In other words, it was all going to come out the way we think it's going to come out with the unions agreement.
You know, I've had a lot of constituents actually say that to me in the last couple of weeks, that they think that there was some behind-the-scenes deal going on and that this may have just been, a lot of fluff. Looking at it myself, I would have thought that there would have been cuts in other areas as opposed to some of the cuts that were laid out by the governor. Reductions in beds for mental health and addiction services, a lot of these social services cuts. I think that even as a freshman legislator, I think there was a lot of other areas that could have been cut. I mean, we have managers. We have one manager for every 5 to 6 employees, when the private sector has, between 12 and 20. So there's things that could have been cut, I think, bureaucratically, and not cause the kind of pain or the list that the governor's office put out. And maybe it was sort of a to get emotions high with people. Laying off, 200 state troopers. To me, if you look at the federal guidelines for safety, we would actually be in violation of the federal safety guidelines of how many state troopers we have to have on duty at any given time. So I didn't think we'd ever lay those off. And even so, those layoffs went out. At the end of the day, I didn't think they'd happen, nor do I think they should happen. So I'm not sure if that is true or not. It may be.
It's really a sad commentary, the cynicism of the electorate at this point. when they see conspiracies at every turn. They have so little
This is
faith.
a state senator, though, who's saying
Well,
this.
but again, as Brenda says, it's reflecting a lot of what he's hearing from constituents as well. To believe that everything takes place behind closed doors and that this was all preordained is really an indictment of government itself. And I hope that with the influx of a number of freshman legislators with a different perspective, we can begin to reverse that feeling that government is a problem. So much of what Brenda described in terms of the reactive cuts, this Plan B list, which I do believe had items on it that were intended to get people's attention, is reflective of the fact that when you do things at the last minute in a reactive manner, you're going to make decisions where you really don't know the ramifications. What we really need to do as legislators is work year-round to understand how we can make government more efficient and more effective in that regard. That takes time. It takes a lot of hard work. It's very hard for a part-time legislature that only meets for 5 months out of the year to really accomplish. But that's the only way we're going to earn back the respect and the confidence of those that we're supposed to represent.
I have to take a break, but when we come back, there are those who say, in effect, the legislature did the opposite by giving the governor free rein to do what he wants with these budget cuts in the last few weeks. We'll talk about that in just a second.
Back in a moment.
Welcome back to Focus on Connecticut, talking about the power of the legislature versus the power of the governor. And it seems he now has more power. He can make decisions up to a greater percentage now of the budget. And Republican leaders said that Democrats have in effect ceded the power of the legislature to the governor. Do you agree with it?
Yeah, and I think so in a sense. And I have to agree with Jonathan. You know, as a freshman legislator, and I think I spoke about this on the floor during the session, that I was very frustrated as somebody who worked in local government and been very involved working bipartisanly on the Board of Education, on the RTM, you know, to make things better for the residents in our towns, and then to go up there and have this very partisan sort of thing go on where we weren't actually sitting down together working on the budget. And I think that's what we should have been doing. There should have been a compromise. There should have been work between the two sides of the aisle, having frank discussions about what should be cut, what can we afford to lose, and what should we keep. And it didn't work like that at all. And yes, I don't think we should give power to the governor on these issues. We're elected, like Jonathan said, we're elected by our constituents, all of us. We all represent, regardless of our party affiliation, the people of Connecticut who are hurting, really hurting right now, having the most difficult time in probably most people's lifetimes. And there's all this sort of political stuff that goes on, and it's not helpful to the community.
It wasn't just the Republicans who were uncomfortable with the hard choice we had to make granting the governor greater rescission authority. A lot of Democrats were very uncomfortable. There was a lot of pushback within the Democratic caucus, which led to a negotiation between the leadership and the governor to come up with a compromise. There was a compromise in a sense. It's unfortunate that Republicans weren't part of that conversation, but we very much limited the period of time in which he'd have that authority. Many of us insisted that we convene again as a legislature if we're unhappy with some of the decisions he had to make. Now, it wasn't quite as categorical as we might have hoped. A number of us were kind of holding out to make sure that the majority leader was explicit in promising we'd come back if we felt the need to do so. In theory, the Appropriations Committee will be convening public hearings shortly based upon these cuts, and I think that'll be important, not just for the public, but for we legislators to understand the impact of some of these cuts that we're very concerned about. They're really going to affect a lot of people who are not in a position to find other alternatives. So we granted him authority grudgingly, and it was only because of the bind we were in. And I think we would have much preferred to have total control over what was on that cut list, and I still hope that we'll have the opportunity to weigh in on it.
I think this goes back, though, from the beginning when we started session in January, and the conversation or the information coming out of the governor's office was, I'm going to get these concessions. So pass the budget. I'm going to pass this budget in May early, and without even a deal. And our side of the aisle, and I'm sure many people on
I voted against it for that very reason.
Side of the aisle were saying, how can we pass a budget unless we have any information about what the unions will concede to? It just makes absolutely no sense. And here we are, going to be heading into August. We don't have a deal with the unions. And even some people, and I, and myself included, will say that those savings that he's saying that he's going to realize from these concessions aren't real savings. A suggestion box.
Only $180 million for suggestions, Brenda.
$180 million for a suggestion box and technology savings that we've been trying to realize in the state for over 5 years, and we've not realized a dime from. And from healthcare, somebody's going to be healthy and all of a sudden we're going to save money. So to me, we should have had these real frank discussions early on and not just say, oh, don't worry, I'm going to get these concessions and everything's going to be fine.
But let's be fair. The governor was new. Most of his people were new to the executive branch. And they had 6 weeks to put together a budget. And I think that the governor showed boldness and assertive leadership. And it was very hard to come up with a balanced budget in 6 weeks. But as Brenda said, I was also uncomfortable with a very large promissory note, $1.6 billion, not knowing exactly what was going to be in it, was very scary to me. I couldn't support a budget unless I knew what was going to be in it. And here we are today. It looks like those of us who were skeptical had reason to do so. Though I think very few of us anticipated that the unions would choose the path that they have taken. And they put us all in a tremendous bind, which has implications for the state beyond just balancing a budget. It has to do with the entire economy of the state of Connecticut.
I'm going to take a break. I have to worry about our economy for a second. When we come back, let's talk about the unions and how they come out after all is said and done in the public's eye. Back in a moment. Welcome back to Focus on Connecticut. I'm Tom Appleby. Our guest, two state representatives. Brenda Kupchick is from Fairfield and Southport. Jonathan Steinberg from Westport. Regardless of how this vote happens or doesn't happen in the next few weeks, has the public's view of the state unions, the state employee unions, changed because of what's gone on? Do you think they've fallen in the public's estimation?
You've heard a number of people say in Connecticut, we're not Wisconsin. We haven't gone down that path. We're not Minnesota. We haven't had gridlock with no government for 3 weeks. The governor tried a different path. He was criticized by Governor Christie in New Jersey. He tried to negotiate with a group that had been supportive of him during the election. I thought he was a fair dealer in that sense. I don't think he necessarily feels betrayed, but it has undermined the union's position in the state of Connecticut. Unions are embattled across the country. Connecticut could have been different. My fear is that when it's all said and done, the opinion about unions and collective bargaining will be very similar to other parts of the country.
I agree with Jonathan. I felt, for one, looking at that agreement, that there could have been better concessions. So I was, too, surprised when they rejected it. Now,
when you say better concessions, for whom?
For everyone. The health care contribution rates. State employees have a very good health care plan. It's what people call a Cadillac plan. It's extremely good. It has value, and you should pay more for it. Anywhere in the private sector, you would pay more for that plan. People every day are paying more for their health care. So to me, there should have been more of that. We should have looked at going to a 401k plan for new hires. And we had a unique opportunity. Many people say crisis opens up opportunity. This was an opportunity to make significant structural changes to the way our state government works so that we can go not just for the next 5 years, but the next 20, 30 years. I personally think that the public safety unions, the correction officers, and the state employees, state troopers, should be taken out of the whole thing. They should be negotiating separately from the rest, from clerical and managers. Those people are public safety employees. And now we're having these issues where they don't want to do it because, the correction officers are looking to join a union in Massachusetts now. So I think that the general public is not too happy that they rejected it when we just lost 4,100 jobs in June in Connecticut. 4,100 people lost their jobs in this state. And we're talking about unions not coming back on longevity bonuses.
Which never made sense in the first place.
It's hard for the average everyday resident who's really struggling. When they look at this, they say, I would never reject that. That to me is amazing. No layoff clause for 4 years. Terrific health care, job security, all of these things. So there's a disconnect about what's going on in the average everyday citizens' lives and the union. So I think that they have taken a hit as far as the public opinion.
I want to take one last break, and we can step back from this. And imagine that you've decided you're not going to run again, and someone in your community says, I'm going to go for your seat. What would you tell them about this first year and what they should expect in the legislature?
I need more than 5 minutes for that.
All right, but I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it. I will be right back. Just a few minutes left, and I am by no means suggesting you're not running for office again. And you have a year off now. It's a 2-year term, and this is the first selectman and mayor's turn in November. But so you've decided not to do it, or take yourself back a year and a half, and you're approaching this for the first time. You have no idea what the legislature is going to really be like. You get up there finally. What strikes you?
It's it's different. Like I mentioned before, than if you're like Jonathan, involved in your community, in state and local government. You get up to state government, and it is different. The committee process is fairly the same.
So in other words, it's much more bipartisan in the committees than it is when you get into the House and have.
Both Fairfield and Westport have nonpartisan. Is yours?
No, ours isn't nonpartisan. But when you're working together for the community, people really more attach themselves to issues than they do. I'm.
And that's what the committees in the legislature are focused on: issues.
So when you're in I would say the partisanship even in the committees, bringing up a bill you like, if you're not in the majority, it's very unlikely that you'll have an opportunity to have a bill that you'd like to see come forward. And working, like I said, together. There is a level of frustration in the freshman class on both sides of the aisle because we all see each other and we comment about it in the hallways, especially at 2 o'clock in the morning when we're in session and we're all looking at each other like, what is going on? Why are we here? Why are we voting on things at 2 o'clock in the morning? So there is, I think, that sort of deer in the caught in the headlights type of...
But your caucus is the one in the catbird seat.
And I think that cuts both ways as well. We have the votes, so sometimes we're not listening. And every once in a while, the Republicans have a good idea or a good amendment. We're not paying attention because we have the votes. On the other hand, the Republicans spend a lot of time. We've had some long filibusters, which you wonder how productive they are for the entire process. What Brenda's alluding to is not just the partisanship, which is really hardened on both sides. Even though there's conversations going on between the leadership, the rank and file often don't know what's going on. But there's also a large dose of what I call power politics. Those who have the power, really on both sides of the aisle, the chairmen of the committees, they wield it with great strength. And unless you have that power, unless you're able to negotiate and build relationships, it's very hard to be effective. And that was one of the learning experiences we had as freshmen. We came in with grand hopes based upon what we felt we could accomplish in bringing out bills and the sort, and then we encountered the reality of the process itself and how you really have to build relationships and be prepared to make some trade-offs and persevere. It might take years before something that matters to you a lot is able to work its way through the system to the point where it's actually brought to the floor. And it may have great merit, it may be a really good thing, but it's just the way the process works. I believe we can make it better. I believe we can make it more efficient, there would be less waste, and more conversations across the aisle. As Brenda alluded to, we freshmen have actually talked a lot to each other, and I think we may represent a new vanguard of those who are willing to try to do things a little differently and not just accept the status quo.
And going back to when I ran last year, I talked a lot to people that I thought that balance was very important in the legislature, and I thought that we needed a more balanced legislature so that we could have a more effective government. And I think we got there somewhat, but I honestly believe that we need, I think, when one side needs the other, that's when real compromise can be had by everyone. And so I still have, I'm still feeling energized. I still think we can do some good things, and I'm willing to work hard about it. And like Jonathan said, I think we do have our freshman class is very, they're energized and they want to work hard for their communities, and they don't want to get caught up in this partisan, divide. So I think I still see a light at the end of the tunnel. So
I think that's a good comment. I'd like to be a 12-month legislator instead of a 5-month legislator. So now you'll have us back. We'll talk about results-based accountability. Some of us are getting involved with that. How do we look at government programs and see if we can make them more effective and efficient? I would feel good if we were able to really reform government the right way over the long haul. But that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of people like Brenda who are willing to work hard year-round to get it done.
Well, I thank you for being so frank, and there is some hope, I think. At least you exhibit it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Thank you for joining us as well. Stay tuned. The news continues.